Joining us now, our Sky News colleague, former Labor Minister Stephen Conroy. Stephen, great to see you. The challenge, even though the Labor Party is still managing the response to the election, its listening tour and so on, some pretty big decisions have to be made quite early, don't they, in terms of those tax cut and that government plan?
Well, that's right. The government intend to press their political advantage, as you would expect them to. They've got a mandate, as they would say. Every government and opposition has this argument after an election. The government now, when it was opposition, blocked Labor's plans even though Labor claimed to have a mandate. This is a normal part of the process. I mean, I think that depending on the size of the wish lists by the crossbenchers, ultimately the government will be able to pass their legislation. From the sound of it, both the Central Alliance people and One Nation have put out a big menu to pick from, and the government should be able to pass their tax cuts.
How would you describe the state of the Labor Party at the moment? Anthony Albanese is on a bit of a listening tour. We see Jim Chalmers in an opinion piece today laying out what his, part of what his vision is and part of his thinking on where the economy's at. Are they doing well considering the surprise loss?
Well, I think the loss has had a very significant, devastating impact. But Albo so far has been up and about, as you'd expect him to be, for anyone who's known him. And I've known him since 1984. I'm feeling very old when I say that, in Young Labor together. And Jim is an absolute dynamo as well. So I think you're already seeing Labor beginning to pick up the pieces. They'll have some challenges they've got to get through the next 2 weeks. I've been there. You've got to turn up to that first opening session, the Governor-General's speech on behalf of the government. They're pretty depressing times, and as you said, some tough issues to start. But I think they've made as good a start as they could do given the shock loss. And I think that you'll see Labor quietly reassessing moving forward. And I think there'll be the inevitable bumps, but I think they're putting their best foot forward.
Well, and for not everyone, obviously it's a loss and they've got to grieve and deal with that. But for a couple of individuals, Stephen, as you well know, it's rejuvenated their careers, not the least of which the leader, Anthony Albanese. He thought he was never going to be leader, and now in 3 years' time he could, if everything goes well for him, could be in the Lodge.
Yeah, look, Albo, if you look at Albo's work rate during the 6 years of opposition, he has been phenomenal. He has toured the country an extraordinary amount of kilometres. He's been out there, he's been talking about infrastructure, he's been pointing to the government's failings in these areas, and I expect him to maintain that work rate. So there has never been any shirking or lagging quietly on the front bench and not doing his job. Albo has been a absolute dynamo of activity, and Jim Chalmers is one of our most talented front benchers. I see a big future for Jim, possibly the next Treasurer of Australia, and who knows where after that. But he will set down, he will articulate, and he has been one of the stars of Labor over the last 3 years in opposition. I've watched him, and he has absolutely grown into the position that he now has. So I think the government will have an excellent debate over the economy. The economy is not what the government have claimed. You've just got to look at those figures. You've got to look at the consumption figures. You've got to look at the investment figures. They are flat, and GDP is going down. This government has been getting away with murder when it comes to talking about the state of the economy. And now you're going to see Jim Chalmers taking it up to them about what Labor believes needs to be done to get the economy growing back to just the average. I'm not talking about above average growth, just the average growth it needs to sustain.
I agree with you. Jim Chalmers is certainly a very good match, an interesting match for Josh Frydenberg, and he's got one of the hardest jobs in Parliament over the next 3 years, absolutely. Just on Bill Shorten, we've seen former Prime Ministers sit back, in Cabinet or on the backbench over the last 10 years. Do you think that Bill Shorten's thought about how he can be different and how he can contribute without being a distraction?
Well, I think Bill, firstly, people need to give Bill a bit of time and space. He will be obviously going through a really difficult time right now. He was inches away from taking becoming the Prime Minister of Australia. So he will need some time, and people should just cut him a little slack, cut him some space. I think the opportunity that he's got with the NDIS, given he is one of the two key people who created it along with Jenny Macklin, means that Bill will be able to get his teeth into something he loves. He'll be able to focus his energies, channel them in a way that will be constructive. And I hope that himself and Stuart Robert are able to sit down quietly away from the political storm and say, look, this is something we both support and believe in. Let's find a way to work together to make it work and improve it and take the edges off it where it's not been working as much as we both want it to work. I think there's a real chance for Bill to continue the fabulous constructive role that he played in helping create it, to now implement it successfully.
And just finally, the union movement. We've seen John Setka facing these charges over harassment of women. Should he remain Secretary of the Union? And does Anthony Albanese need to take a strong stand on that?
Well, look, Albo has already made it very clear he's on Rosie Batty's side. I think John's comments around Rosie Batty are unfortunately out of line. They're not deserved and they're inaccurate. John's never been a friend of mine. I've barely met him. He's not someone who's ever voted for me inside the Labor Party, so I come to this with a fairly straightforward point of view. The comments around Rosie Batty, he should have a think about that and clear them away because they were wrong.
Why is he such a feared figure? Give us an idea at what kind of gravitas he holds within the Labor Party, because it seems that there's a huge reluctance to, criticise him at the moment.
Yeah, look, John is a tough operator. He works in an industry where his members die. And employers cut corners, and safety issues have seen his members. He's got to deal with their families afterwards. So this is a tough sector. And, the faux outrage about, oh, my God, someone swore on a building site. I mean, for goodness me. Anyone who's ever walked past a building site won't be shocked to hear that there's a bit of swearing goes on. And it's a tough environment. It's tough employers, tough union. Everyone's got to abide by the law. Both sides have got to abide by the law. But John has delivered for his members. There is building labourers get good pay and better safety because of the union. And John is a tough operator inside that environment in a very tough sector. That's not to excuse unlawful behaviour. That's not to excuse bad personal behaviour. I don't want to comment on the case that's before the court. Apparently, it's heading towards a settlement. The charges that is reported are going to be agreed to don't constitute grounds to dismiss someone from their position, I believe, but I'm not an expert on that. Then the other case, which is being talked about, will go to court, so we should leave that one alone. But on the Rosie Batty stuff, he's just out of line. Albo's called him out on it. He should, be big enough to say, look, I'm going through a stressful time at the moment. I shouldn't have said them. I apologise unreservedly, and life should then move on. Absolutely. Well, a building site, as you know, Stephen Conroy, nothing like a newsroom. You'd never hear any swearing going on behind the scenes. Never in a newsroom, absolutely. Never. Good to see you. Thanks so much.